When you have to shoot, shoot, don't talk.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another Trap House podcast. My name's Justin Jett. Today's show, I'm just going to hang out with Charlie. We're going to sit back and address some questions that people have sent in, talk about some current things that we're showing on the Hoosier Trapper Outdoors. And I hope everyone's having a great trapping season, holiday season. But before we do that, I do got to mention we do have the new Trap House podcast t-shirts available now. That's at HoosierTrapperSupply.com. Make sure you hit up the website. We got all your trapping needs. And like I said, the new t-shirts are there. They're on the homepage currently. And while I'm at it, got to give it up to the rest of the sponsors. We have Top Lot Stretcher Company. Their website is toplotstretcherco.com. And I've said it a million times. They have awesome adjustable stretchers, made particular to that animal, whatever you may be after. If it's adjustable fox stretcher, adjustable even a fisher, coyotes, bobcats, that sort of thing. They do a good job. They make a quality product, so check out their website. We have WeebyKnives.com with us. There's quite a selection there. You got skinning knives, fleshing knives, stuff you could use in the field, fur handling tools, all that good stuff. WeebyKnives.com, check it out. Then we have J3 Outdoors, maker of the Hags bracket. Jeff makes a great American-made product there. He's got bait holders, beaver rod ends, the tail hooks, the universal lock, spring clips. Very slick website, so check out j3o.com for all that good stuff. And he's got a line of coffee out too called Trapline Coffee. There is a Trapline blend, a Kodiak blend, and a cherry red blend. I'm not much of a coffee drinker, but I'd definitely give this stuff a shot. And before you go out on the trap line, get you going. So, all right, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one. All right, welcome back to another Trap House podcast. As you can see, I got the new merch on here. New t-shirts available now at HoosierTrapperSupply.com. Pretty sharp.
Yep. So these are not the ones that are sold through a third party. These are ones directly available at Hoosier Trapper Supply, and they're on the site. They're on the highlighted featured items on the homepage.
Mm-hmm.
So,
this little cabin here. It's all about the cabin behind me. That's where it all started. So we're right here, bringing it all together.
Right.
So, no special guest today. It's just Charlie and myself, and we're gonna talk about some stuff that we've covered before numerous times, but it's definitely appropriate to go ahead and bring it back up again for what people are dealing with this time of year and kind of what's going on with the current Hoosier Trapper Outdoors episodes. So we can touch in on that. So. Where should we start?
Yep, and then at the end we're going to go through this Q&A, some relevant topics, that kind of thing, and then at the end it's nonfiction, but it's a story about fur buyers and the mink market and all of that, and I went through all that, so it's in my view it's pretty interesting. So that'll be at the end of the episode. So the most recent episode we. In Arkansas, when we got down there, they were doing a pretty sizable prescribed burn, which is common in national forests and wildlife management areas within national forests, basically to keep the undergrowth under control. Most national forests are working on the natural resource of timber, particularly in the South. So, that's all a item that is bid off and sold and then logged. So part of that for the trees themselves, wildlife, etc., whatever they do these prescribed burns. So when we first got there, it was quite smoky in a lot of areas. And the road that we were actually driving on was the fire break. even though there was a couple places where it actually jumped the road, but they got it out real quickly. And we had evidently got there at the tail end of it. So they had evidently, I don't remember what day we got there, but the day before is evidently when they kind of quit, because they were still monitoring the roads some.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of stuff was still burning the logs and stuff, as you saw in the video. But the general leaf, undergrowth, brush, that stuff had all been burnt through and was really not doing much. But we kind of wondered how it would affect our catch.
Mm-hmm.
And in the scheme of things, it really it didn't affect the catch. It may have made it better in some cases. I guess for those of us that generally are not in that situation, kind of a freshly tilled field, chisel plowed field or whatever, that gets a lot of mice and food sources available for predators up and moving. So a lot of times fox and coyotes both are working on fields that have been recently worked by a farmer. So the prescribed burn, same thing.
Yeah. Well, you kind of addressed it in the video too. I think it's not like a raging rapid forest fire.
Right.
This is just maintained slow burn. Stuff's not freaking out for their lives, and they can actually, go in and catch little mice and varmints running around.
Right. So it may take a day or two or whatever, but in the long run, I think it's better.
Mm-hmm.
I want to compare this to a lot of times we'll set the deer camps and we'll set the fireplace ring, which has probably recently, the deer hunters were probably there 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, burnt trash and whatever. So those fireplace rings are definitely an attraction for any species. Clearly, a fireplace ring in a prescribed burn is nothing special because everything's the same. So it's not a standout. So that's kind of gives you an idea of the landmark, the point of focus for the species that you're after. That was probably kind of eliminated in that case. So, not to say that clearly in the areas that didn't have the prescribed burn go through it, the deer camps that were still there and the fireplace ring that was most recently used, those are still all very worth checking out and setting near or setting on. So, anyways, I think that's just kind of something thinking about on this last episode.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. The past 10 years or so going down there or anywhere, even Mississippi or where some places where they burn areas. We haven't actually been in active.
No.
So
we've driven
obviously
through
where they cut the roads and got things ready or
right. We just happen to always miss it.
Right.
And we went a little bit later last year, so I think that might be part of the reason too. Because most of the time we go in January, and this time was in February, so that might be part of it.
Yeah.
Which, in mentioning that, I think that makes it better for the bobcat trapping. Because I think it's closer. The big toms are out traveling more, and it seems like we do better on the bobcats in February than we do, particularly in early January.
Yeah.
There's some exceptions there, but in general, I think that it is generally true. In talking to some other trappers, that they felt that was probably correct. How they felt as well, experienced trappers. So.
Yeah, so if you end up in that situation, set your traps.
Yeah.
Don't think that it's no good because
with the prescribed burn.
Yeah. Get out there and set.
Yeah. And I guess coyote or bobcats prime late. The fur gets better later in the season. So, generally you want to wait till mid-December, December or later to trap them ideally. Of course, by the time we're there in February and the coyotes are way past prime. They probably peaked out in December and they're going backwards, since they peaked out. So that's the trade-off. I'd much rather have a nice bobcat than a southern coyote anyway. So, it's definitely a fair trade. So,
yeah. Speaking of bobcats, our next thing on our list here is, and this happened recently. We were out with Matt. If you guys watched those episodes a few weeks ago, I caught a bobcat and we had to release it. That's a question that comes up all the time, either by phone or online. Someone's always asking how to do it and what's the proper way, because you could actually cause some harm and potentially accidentally dispatch a bobcat when you're trying to release it.
Right. They're so I guess to make this relative, here in Indiana, most bobcats or all bobcats have to be released, but you don't have a season. So that's in Ohio, same way. So there are states where it is relevant to talk about turning bobcats loose. There are also states like Illinois where it's very, very limited number of. I think they issue tags or it's a draw system or whatever. So they're still turning a lot of bobcats loose too. And in states that, once Indiana ever gets a season, we'll have a quota. There'll be one per trapper most likely. So the trappers in the areas where the bobcats are will be still releasing bobcats. So, so the best way to release bobcats, there's really two methods that are good for releasing bobcats. One being the board, 4x4, roughly sheet of plywood. You can make it like a hog herding panel with the handles at the top if you want to get fancy, but you need a little notch at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be that big, roughly, like that. And basically that notch is where the foot of the bobcat is.
Right.
And then you've got the cat on one side, you're on the other, and then you can get the trap.
Let's be clear about that. You're on the opposite side.
Yeah. Unlike a lot of coyotes that cower down when you catch them, bobcats are always ticked off and they're always wanting to eat you up. It doesn't matter if they're weigh 7 pounds or 30 pounds. They are all ticked off and not happy about the circumstances. So you do have to be careful with them.
Right.
And then the other method for turning them loose is a big tub, a big tote or a big tub. It's going to be fairly good size. Obviously, you're going to, tilt it towards the cat and then go over. And then same thing, the foot's going to be sticking out, and then you can release it. You want to talk about using a catch pole on a cat? I mean, the catch poles, it's just very risky to use one.
Mm-hmm. I will say on the tote, if it's smaller or thinner shelled, some people would sit on it and get the foot off or trap off the foot. But if you're a big old boy, I wouldn't do that. You might fall through and have an issue.
Oh, yeah.
But generally, that cat it will once it's in the dark, it's probably going to settle down and just sit there while you can do your thing and get the trap off.
Right.
But I would recommend a sturdy tote.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But as far as using a catch pole, and sometimes people are in a bind and that's all they have. You're gonna have to do it extremely quick if you go that route, which is
not recommended.
Not recommended at all. I would try anything else before last ditch effort to remove the animal.
If you do use the catch pole too, you want to try to get a front leg in.
Yeah, if you can because here their arteries are real tight, small. It takes no time at all to choke out a cat, and if you use too much force, you can actually damage this area. And even though you release the cat and it runs off, it could have some issues later on that could be fatal. Charlie mentioned the arm or having a foot in there. That's more so the catch pole is like across the body. It's not all on the neck. So it's here and it'd be under this arm. So it's across either side. But that's a challenge, as you know, trying to get a bobcat you got to loop in the leg and then try and loop up over the head. You got to probably have a fairly good size catch pole to begin with on the loop end. Right.
Especially when they're sitting there trying to grab or bite the loop or whatever. So that is challenging.
I've heard someone say this and I don't know. I've never seen it done. We've never done it. If you have a cat, he's caught by the front paw and you loop a back leg and stretch him out. It takes two people. One person is going to stretch him out so far that where that cat can't lunge at you because he's getting pulled this way. Then you got to release on this end, but then you got a cat by one leg on the end of the pole. It's a rodeo for sure.
Right.
But there's nothing that's going on around the neck.
There is a thing that I've been seeing online, and that's about all I know about it. It's a pole that actually will release the trap. You just go in and it just releases the trap, or opens the trap up so the animal can get out. It looks like an awesome tool. So if anybody knows anything about it or whatever, they want to put the comments below. But I'm assuming that will be on the market this year. I don't know. So
we're just finding out about it not too long ago.
But it looks awesome.
The way it works, it's on a pole, like I said, and you can reach in, and it's got like a prong on the front where it grabs the trap, and those prongs are on the levers, and then up from there, there's another handle where you pretty much pry it down, and it opens it.
Yeah,
and that's it, and you're a safe distance away. It looks pretty slick, so
yeah. Here in Indiana, our fox and coyote season comes in October 15th, so everything but skunks has to be released. So for that, it would be handy for those that start that early, whatever. So any of that stuff would be good. So
what else?
Oh, I got a quick story. So, and I've mentioned this before, but Ardell Graw, who used to have Trapper Days, he'd have a contest at his Trapper Days. Now, recently, Ardell just died a couple of weeks ago, in fact, at Graw's Lures back in the 70s and 80s. He was very well known, still known too, but very well known back then. Anyways, he used to have a contest where it'd be a live badger in a 55-gallon drum and an empty 55-gallon drum nearby. Well, the idea was you reached in, grabbed the badger barehanded, and transferred him to the other drum.
Yeah, it's a contest.
Right, it was a contest.
Who can do it fastest
without getting bit.
Without getting bit.
So the story is, and I've been to Ardell's place, but I never went to his Trapper Days. So this is through someone else, but very reliable sources. So Ardell would go first, and he would open the lid, grab the badger, pick it up, and throw it in the other barrel. Well, the badger was in the dark.
Yeah, his eyes had not adjusted to the sunlight when you open that. And
Right.
Pretty much blinded it.
Right. So the next guy up, the badger at this point's irritated, because I think they're always irritated, and
his eyes have adjusted.
He's getting used to the daylight. So that turned into some issues. But anyways, it's a good story. You're talking about the cat being in the dark, so that made me think of that. But
yeah, that's hilarious.
So,
we should try that sometime.
Yeah, let's maybe with a coon. Well,
yeah,
that'd
be
really,
even worse, probably.
Yeah, that would be worse.
So I'm sure most people out in the country are feeling a little chilly. Even in this deep south, we got a little chilly this past weekend with this weather. But difficult time for trappers out there. The biggest part of the game is keeping your traps functioning through this tough weather. A lot of freeze and thaw, rain, snow, sleet, you name it. And especially for guys like us here in Indiana, it's never consistent. You can't just have a nice freeze over and just deal with it. It changes constantly.
Right. So yeah, those of you in the Midwest, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, we're all kind of dealing with the same thing. Give you an idea, it was literally, depending on the thermometer you looked at, last Friday was 8-9 degrees below zero actual temperature, and then the wind chill factored in because it was very, very windy, was 30 to 40 below wind chill factor, and that was Friday. Today is Wednesday, and it was up almost 50 degrees, and by Saturday it's supposed to be 60 degrees. So, I mean that's a crazy swing in temperature,
right?
Which creates definitely we had a little bit of snow, maybe a couple 3 inches, and then we're gonna have some rain or whatever. So it's gonna get more trapping season like with all this.
It's gonna be real muddy, mucky and muddy. So if you had trouble chipping in an ice set trying to bed a trap, couldn't get it bedded in there to save your life, and now you'll have plenty of mud to bed it in now.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention, there was some couple guys in here on Thursday, and that weather was fine, and it started changing that evening, and then the next day it was literally dangerously cold, particularly with the wind chill because it was very windy. And they were going to go out and set traps that Friday just to see, it's like, oh, guys in Canada and Alaska do that, so we're going to go out and try to experience that. And I know the guys in Canada and Alaska deal with very harsh, very weather, lots of snow, cold weather, whatever. But if you talk to them, when it's really bad, really windy, dangerously cold, they don't go.
Yeah.
I mean, most of their stuff's snared. It's going to be dead anyways. They don't go. They just wait it out, storm to calm back down, and then go back out. Still might be 0 out or 10 below, but if the wind's not blowing, and everything's relative. And this, you got to be sensible, particularly when here in the Midwest, when we're not really accustomed to that weather. It'd be pretty dangerous. So, anyways, that's my soapbox. But
Be safe.
yeah,
Safety first.
yeah, be safe. Yeah, it's all supposed to be fun, So,
Be fun, but it's not so fun when you lose your fingers, just frostbite.
right, fall through on bad ice, whatever. And it clearly at that point the ice was just forming, so it wasn't thick enough to hold you. So,
Yeah.
so going back to dealing with the mud and all that. I mean, as you've seen us, we use lots of coveralls.
Mm-hmm.
Peat moss is another good alternative. It's a little more reasonable than coveralls in price. And then wax dirt is ideally the best. If you don't get enough made, we do sell that wax dirt. It gets a little expensive. I think a good way to go is peat moss or coveralls. Bed your trap the best you can in the existing dirt. And then,
even if it's mud under there, we usually, or I do at least, throw something under there.
Yeah.
To help kind of thicken it up to where it's not just slop.
Right.
You mix it in coveralls or peat moss or something. That's all temporary fix. The peat moss is not ideal by any means in the long run. Once it gets moisture, you're in trouble. But to start out and get things rolling, yeah, it's a great alternative. And like you said, it's fairly cheap and it's handy to have.
Right. So yeah, we'll have that buffer between the trap and the mud. Helps a little bit. If it's not freezing, for an extended period of time where the ground's going to freeze deep, particularly here in the Midwest or in the South, we're just dealing with crusting freeze. You can bed the trap best you can in the existing dirt. Use a buffer if you need to, be it coveralls, peat moss, whatever, wax dirt, and then we'll do the bulk of the cover of the trap with coveralls.
Yeah,
we still use pan cover, and then we will cover that with wax dirt, and that basically helps it blend it, and it keeps those coveralls from blowing away. If you're using peat moss, some guys leave it, and some blend it. In the wax dirt would be good to blend that as well. So ideally, all of us should get all our wax dirt made back in August, September, or whatever. And
in a perfect world.
Yeah, in a perfect world. So,
Yep.
But there are good alternatives for this kind of weather, and that being peat moss, coveralls, and you can buy wax dirt. So.
Yeah. Well, we've used coveralls for years now, and I've gotten used to what, there's a give and take with all these methods, but I've gotten used to what that entails of what you're dealing with. It's not ideal, like you said, because it's lightweight and it is hard to bed with, but when you do like that buffer layer underneath, it doesn't make it as bad.
Right.
And, you do all the other little tricks to help stabilize your trap. You kind of dish it out so it connects more on the corners of the trap to keep that from teeter-tottering. Things like that, a smaller bed, things like that. That really adds up, to keep it, working well.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Don't dig your trap bed any bigger than it absolutely has to be.
Yeah. Because, if you just had a pile of coveralls right here and you set a trap in it, good luck. You know what I mean? You can't.
Right.
You have to do some other stuff there. And it's more or less just getting out there and working with it, and you'll figure out what works best for you and your, weather conditions.
And a common question is, well, doesn't that make the animal shy away from it? Yeah, it may a few, but overall it does keep you going, and you will catch a lot of animals that come into it. So
yeah, they're very well. Animals will just pass it up.
Yep.
But then they might come back.
Yeah.
So
it keeps you going. When,
it's better than sitting at home watching TV.
Right.
So you're done for if you're not.
Right.
Speaking, I got to bring this up because it just kind of blew me away. I saw on the Catch Circle, which is our our Facebook trapping group where everyone, anything goes really. That's trapping related. But there's a guy that posted last night, and he said after he dispatched this coyote, how concerned should he be with the casing landing by the set for the remake? I'm bringing this up because I just don't overthink this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science. They already know you're there. I mean, these predators, they know their surroundings. They know something's a little off. They're extremely wary. If we're talking about coyotes, just get in, make your set, do the best you can, and move on. Don't worry about a shell casing scaring off a coyote from your set.
Yeah,
things like that. Before I started trapping, you always talked about the scent. People were really cautious about what they were wearing.
Years ago, it was crazy.
And I'm telling you, it's gotten totally different these days of how people are there. We know several trappers don't even use gloves and things like that.
Right.
I mean, we do, but it's not the end of the world is what I'm getting at. So just don't overthink it. Do the best you can in the weather and with the set. So
yeah, we actually get some crazy questions on one that came through here this fall that kind of made me, in 40 some years of doing this, scratch my head. Was the guy was concerned that the dirt, what about the dirt that may sift through a fiberglass pan cover because it's not because it's like a screen. Don't be concerned about it. Like Justin said, don't overthink it. That was over the top. So
hey, I guess if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
But now you do.
Yeah.
If you're watching, you know. What else we got, Charlie?
Somebody recently mentioned about cold weather and primeness, and they were waiting the weather to get cold and whatever. And so trap when you can. Trap when you have time. If you have the available time that you can pick and choose when you want to go, do that. Like I said, bobcats prime late, coyotes prime earlier. Try to hit it accordingly. But the big thing is just get out and trap when you can. Have a good time, catch some critters. Clearly, the later you wait in the season, the more bad weather you're going to run into. Generally speaking, I mean, it was this fall around here was pretty ideal because unfortunately we didn't have time to fit much in. But
I always feel like that's the case with trapping coons.
Yeah,
catch a bunch of them early, but they're all blue. They're not really prime yet at all. But then later, once they're about ready and it starts getting cold, they do that semi-hibernation
they
deal.
lay up.
They're harder to catch for that reason alone. They don't run as often. So it's definitely a balancing act.
Right.
But just like you said, just go when you can, when you have time.
Right.
Get time off work or whatever.
And a lot of times, guys will be concerned about primeness of fur, which in this fur market, definitely the prime fur would be what sells versus stuff that's not prime. But it's the market generally, and speaking other than bobcats, otters, and beaver, if it's not prime, then so what? Because if it were fully prime, it's not going to be worth that much more anyways.
It all depends on your end goal too. When I'm bringing up the coon thing, obviously coons aren't next to nothing unless you got something really special and prime and ready to go.
But if
you're just trying to eliminate some issues near your deer feeders, and it doesn't matter what time of year it is, just do what you got to do.
Right. Degree of primeness is triggered by shortness of daylight hours, not particularly cold weather. A lot of guys will say, "Well, we had a freeze in late October or mid-October. They ought to be getting their winter coat." Well, it doesn't just happen overnight. It's all timing, and the shortness of the days is really what triggered that and what caused primeness. If we had an incredibly cold year, maybe to a point, but I think it has more to do with lots of more overcast days, just less daylight. Really, as what
it's crazy how that works.
Really. Yeah. So,
what else?
So we've been having a lot of questions about selling fur.
Yeah.
And I know growing walls are running some routes in some states where they can, I know they want beaver from everywhere. And they are running some routes, and we're going to hopefully be able to get him here at our shop. But for those of you that obviously don't live in this state or whatever, you clearly check out Groenewald Fur and Wool website and see if they are running routes in your area, and keep an eye on it, because I'm assuming they're going to add routes as we go into the spring.
Yeah.
So the trapper sales will be available.
Yeah. Check with your state association, see when their dates are.
Right.
Ours is when usually?
Ours here in central Indiana is the Bartholomew County Fairgrounds, and it's usually the first Saturday of March, and that should hold true this year. But just watch social media on that. The advantage of the fur sale, the Trapper Association sponsored fur sales, is there will be buyers there looking for specific things, actual buyers that are selling on the fur market. But there will also be buyers there looking for stuff that they can sell novelty. So get tanned and sell it that way, either making stuff out of it or just selling the tan skins. And those guys are a little harder to reach just for the average trapper, because they don't have a shop a lot of times, so
it's kind of a word of mouth thing.
Right. And they show up the sale because they know that they can buy the stuff at the sale, particularly now, those guys are able to buy it reasonable for sure. And so that market is the driving force behind skunks for sure. In anything that would be a little different certainly goes to that market, or the taxidermy market. If you've got, we mentioned it before too, if you catch something odd, list it on taxidermy.net and you will come out quite well on that. But going back to the fur sales, there a lot of times there'll be buyers there from out of state. They're traveling and looking for fur. Because we don't have huge concentrations of trappers like we once did, these guys know that if they go to a sale that they can get a certain amount of quantity of fur, in front of them. They got a chance to buy it. So there is definitely an advantage to that. And it basically all comes down to who shows up to buy on how successful those sales are. We have certainly seen that over the years. So
yeah, that is a great way to get connected too.
Yeah.
Just being there.
Yeah.
You never know who you'll meet. Then you can meet all the individual buyers.
It's at minimum, it's a great, even if you don't have fur to sell, it's a good 3-4 hours of social.
Oh yeah. Just go hang out.
Time. Yeah.
Drink some coffee and share stories or whatever.
Yeah. Talk trapping with trappers that are there to sell fur or not to sell fur, or there just to see what's going on. So anyways.
Speaking of selling too, Fur Harvesters is coming here, or they are coming here to Hoosier Trapper on April 1st, 9 to 10 a.m. So keep that in mind too.
For those of you, obviously, that don't live in Indiana, we have a lot more listeners outside of Indiana than we do.
Right.
Just check their website, the Fur Harvesters Auctions, and check out
furharvesters.com.
Check out their website for people that are running routes to pick up fur. And this is for consignment purposes. They're not buying. They're not writing checks. That would be strictly fur that's going to the auction at Fur Harvesters.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you look at their website, they'll have their last receiving date, which is the date that they have to have fur in the building, so they have time to get it graded and allotted and all that. And then they'll have their sale dates. So, there used to be North American Fur Auctions. Of course, they went under. And then there's always been Fur Harvesters as well. And Fur Harvesters is still going. It's basically the only auction company we got left. So, here in North America. So, definitely check those out. So if you want to sell fur, there are places to sell fur, for sure. Yeah. It may not be in the local...
Somebody is always wanting the guy right down the road or in their county.
Right.
But those days are gone.
Long gone. Long gone. So...
What else, Charlie?
Well, we can get to my fur buyers and fur buying story.
Yeah, well, I'm ready to hear. I don't know what you got up your sleeve right now, but
so, give you a perspective on those that are in the fur business, the allure of the fur business, the allure of buying fur, the entrepreneurial side of that. In a way, all trappers are kind of business people or they in the past. Nowadays, not so much. And our standard line here is if you're 35 or younger, most guys don't even ask what the fur market is. They're trapping. But back in the 70s and 80s when the fur market was in its peak, trappers were definitely of the entrepreneurial side of their, that was the perspective, because they go out, make an investment on equipment, go out and line up ground, catch fur, then sell it. So, all of us at that point had that. And then a few decided, well, they were going to get in the fur business, or they liked the idea of the fur business or whatever. So back in those days, a lot of trappers that became fur buyers normally came, and this is what I did, became connected with a much larger buyer that they would sell to, and they would give them guidelines on what to pay, and over time, train them on how to grade fur, what they were looking for, all of that, keep them up to date on the market. And generally, those guys would make good on what they told them, even if the market adjusted. Of course, they would get with them and say, hey, you got to adjust down. During the 70s and 80s, a lot of times they would just adjust up, because those were really good years. But there were a few times where it did adjust down and make some corrections. But in general, those were really good years. My first year buying fur technically was in 1975. Generally, from 1976 through the 91 season, I was buying fur. So I guess the story I want to relate this evening was, as I became more experienced as a buyer, I started shipping direct to Hudson Bay Company, which was later years became North American Fur Auctions, and that's the original Hudson Bay Company that that was around since, I think it was 1640 or something like that, long time. So so I started shipping more fur there. I was able to finance myself. Originally, when I actually first started to buy fur, the buyer that I bought for actually would provide money to buy with. So, obviously, as a young buyer, and once you gain their trust, they will actually front you money. But and that was back in when you could spend $50,000 in a few weeks, and no one had those kind of resources. It was crazy. So,
and you're how old?
I was technically I was 18. So I was 18
years old.
So so in the mid 80s, 83, 84 roughly, I probably 80, maybe 84, 85. I went to the sale in Toronto at Hudson Bay, and you as a buyer, you could go there, and they had an observation room, and then there was an actual sale room, which looked like for those of you that have seen it online, it looked like a lecture hall, and then there would be an auction table up front, and then all the samples of fur were in another room that you could go through and then mark your calendar as to which ones you wanted to buy. But as a seller at that sale, then we would be in observation room. Of course, they had readout screens, and you could mark your calendar and listen to the auction. And it was pretty exciting when your personal stuff came up, because you knew a lot it was going to be on how it was going to do. So the first time I went up there, I had some stuff there, and I had shipped some mink, and buyers, if you just generally bought as a buyer, if you bought 10,000 muskrats, which back in those days was not, you could do that. I did that. Nowadays, you couldn't buy 10,000 in the whole state of Indiana. It would just be virtually impossible. But you only might buy 200 or 300 mink or whatever. There was never a huge number of mink. So I had a few mink on that sale. And this was the February sale. So back then they had a December sale, which was good. Then they had like a February sale. It might be February, it might be early March, but we generally would call it February sale. And then there would be a later sale, like April, late March, April, even maybe May. And then there might be a summer sale. But that February sale was always kind of the target sale. That was always seemed to be a good sale to be on. Well, anyways, I had some mink on there, and the mink were like crazy good. I mean, like windfall profit. So as a buyer, it's pretty exciting. So the next year, I kept that in mind, and then I shipped mink for reference. I shipped mink to the next sale, and I was like, I barely broke even on them. I mean, it was like night and day difference. So all right, so the February sale is the one to sell mink on, and I had always heard that, but now I was getting a dose of it. So So the next year, I was like, all right, I'm going to try to buy more mink, which is not, unless you went out beating the doors of dealers and getting crazy, is not that easy to do, just to buy mink. So I think I was out in Pennsylvania selling some coon one time, and I did buy that guy's mink, the dealer that was buying, but he only had like 18. So anyways, I was able to put together a few mink. I think I had almost 300, 200 and some. Went up to the sale. I was at the sale, and they did really, really well again. So
now you know you're like February.
Right.
Is
right. That sale. Here again, shipped them up what I had at the end of the season, and then the later sale, here again, barely broke even. I mean, on them for the investment. I mean, just barely broke even. So it clearly had to be that sale. And the idea was, well, they're worried the mink are springy and they're not near the quality if you go later in the year. I think generally those buyers had their needs filled with that February sale, and they just didn't, So it was that one sale, and even the December sale. The December sale, they may have not even offered mink. I don't remember. So a lot of times they wouldn't even offer certain species that were in limited numbers on earlier sales. So February was the mink sale. I mean, they sold everything, but that was the time to sell mink. So all right, so I'm going to do it again. So the sale was 1987, February, got a bunch of mink together, and they did really, really well again. And that sale actually did really well on everything. It was absolutely crazy. And the only sale that I could really compare that to, and there were good sales back in those days, but that was a really good sale. And I could compare it to the February sale of 2013. For those of you that listened to that sale, that had furred on that sale, and did really, really well. I mean, crazy good sale. I mean, they sold everything in the place. Same with that in 1988, 87. They sold every fur in the place. I mean, it was crazy. So the buyers there made huge windfall profits. And when a buyer, just to give you reference, when a buyer bought a piece of fur, he had an end game in mind, what he thought he could sell it for. And if they could make 50 cents or so on a muskrat, if they could make a $4 or $5 margin on a raccoon, then that was considered very, very successful. These prices well exceeded those. It was just like huge windfall profit.
And for the people listening that don't know anything about this how much fur are we talking about? When you say everything in the place, like, I mean, we're talking thousands.
We're talking hundreds of thousands of raccoons, hundreds of thousands of muskrats. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of some of the lesser species. I mean, this is the fur boom years. I mean, we're talking huge quantities of fur. They sold it, and buyers are like, unbelievable. It was just, and it had been good for a long time. Don't get me wrong, but that sale, everything came together. It's kind of like the perfect storm. It was perfect. So all of us go home, and here again, I shipped fur to the next sale. Poor showing, not very good. This is the spring 1987. That sale, I believe, was actually in Montreal, if I'm not mistaken, instead of Toronto. But go back home and say, all right, so we're going to gear up. And that was actually the year that I built this side of the shop here. And started buying fur. And of course, the word got out that things were even better than they'd been. So it was like a barn burner year with trappers. And we're incredibly busy in the supply business. And then we started buying fur, and we were very busy in that. And Hudson Bay started sending letters out, saying, hey, this thing is not looking so good. Scale back. Start dropping your prices. And that kind of sent shockwaves through. This is in November. This is early. So that sent shockwaves through the whole system. So buyers started scaling back and offering less. Well, guys had in their mind that was impossible. Of course, the buyers are the bad guys, and we're all terrible. it continued to slide, and they kept sending. And back then, it was like, it wasn't emails; it was snail mail. So they'd send out these letters and say, "Hey, this is not looking good." So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, the mink sale's probably still good. So I got together a couple hundred mink again or whatever, and some people I knew got very serious about buying mink. I mean, very serious. One guy mortgaged his house. One guy basically financed. I mean, we're talking guys who were buying 10,000 mink, or 5,000 mink. So, we're all thinking, well, the coon are sliding, maybe the other stuff isn't so good, but the mink will probably still hold up because they've been so good. You're always the optimist, for
Yeah.
So, and these guys, it's just like the guy that goes to the casino and loses all his money, and then he's, taking advances on his credit card. So I didn't do that. So we come around. We just came off of that sale in February of 87 that was just like a barn burner sale. We're going into the fall of 87, and things are starting to look like pretty shaky. And we're all, a lot of buyers are like, oh, we've seen this before, there's been some corrections, whatever. So we get to the February sale, and we're all there. I remember my wife Angie was with me, and Andrea, who works here now, was a baby. She was 1 year old. This is in 1988.
My wife.
Yeah, Justin's wife. She's a baby, and we had her at the sale as well. And that sale started, and it was a disaster. There was one story that was it's secondhand, but it's good secondhand information, where one of the guys, one of the big buyers, had offered somebody that had a bunch of mink, like, the day before the mink sale, he said, I will buy those mink from you. And he was going to offer him a profit, and the guy declined it. And we're talking several thousand mink. It was in the deal. He declined it. So the mink sale comes along, and it's as bad as everything else. It was not good. So basically, all the money in that windfall profit that was made in 12 months earlier was gone, and then some. So, yeah, there are times when you may be frustrated with a fur buyer, but the risk that a fur buyer takes, particularly when prices are high, is incredible. So after that sale, a guy died from a heart attack. One of the big mink buyers.
He had a heart attack?
Mm-hmm. One of the, and I found this one out later. Another guy basically went crazy. He is and lost his house and lost his wife. Another guy I know lost his house. So it was no joke. It was very serious. It was a huge economic collapse of the fur industry. And it had to adjust itself, and it took a long time. So to give you guys an idea, the fur that I had on that sale, and I had a lot of fur on that sale, for me, I was bigger than an average buyer, but I was not a big buyer. And I'm talking buyers that buy 100,000 coon. I was nothing like that. It took me 6 years to get that fur sold, and the fur at the end of the 6 years, on years 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 10 cents on the dollar, 15 cents on the dollar. At that point, it's just like kind of glad to just clear the books.
Just get it out. Yeah.
Right. So I continued to buy. That was 88. So then that season, the next season was 80, 88, 89, 90, 91. And I continued to buy for 2 more years. And then at the 91 season, it was like a call it quits. It was, the biggest problem was that you could sell fur at that new level. That we were buying muskrats for like 75 cents. We were buying coons for $2. And you could make a small profit off of that. You couldn't make the $4 margin because you were,
Yeah.
But you could sell it and be in the positive, but no one would bring it in. And then labor got so expensive you couldn't justify even paying yourself to do the labor. I mean, it was, even if you did, and I did the most of that back then by myself in those years, not prior to 88, that I had additional help in here putting up fur handlers. But no one would bring the fur in because they had so many good years. I mean, basically it had been good for 11, 12, 13 years with a few corrections, but they were minor corrections as compared to this. This was a complete overhaul. So that's my story.
I almost had a heart attack.
And
That's wild.
And it's like,
I mean, you've told me this before,
Yeah.
but just hearing it again, it's been a while.
yeah, and I have relayed part of this, but I never really relayed this mink story, and here were these holdouts, and I remember these guys, and that was and that story about the offer for the mink from one bigger buyer to somebody else.
Oh man,
That pretty much, I think, is pretty much 100% factual. I need to check with a couple guys. I need to get with Keith Winkler was at that sale. Tim Caven was at that sale. The big guys for that time are no longer with us. Ed Bauer was at that sale. Letty Shada was at that sale. For you old timers that remember those names. Several others, and a lot of those buyers are no longer with us, and a lot of those buyers were not around much longer after that. So it was very devastating in this industry. So when it was funny because when 2013 came around and prices were crazy good, we had that February sale. It was really, really good, and then that sale, that fall, things started already falling apart. Now our coyote season, or our coyote market, actually stayed good. It even got fairly, that was one of the things that stayed fairly good, up until a couple years ago. But these guys were jumping in that they're going to get in the fur business now, and it's like that is the wrong time to get in the fur business. You never jump in when it gets high like that, because there's only one way for it to go.
Yeah.
I mean, there's two ways. It could either stay basically the same, which it's not going to stay that high, most likely, or it's going to go down. Well, of course it went down. You don't jump. Just for those of you that are thinking about this, now is the time. If you want to dabble in buying fur,
now's the time.
Now is the time.
Hell, I even thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just anyways, just kind of I thought I'd relate that story. It's kind of
This is a special Trap House podcast edition, story time with
Yeah.
Charlie Meshack.
yeah, that's kind of a perspective. So
That was great.
yeah, we can talk about going to the sale in Toronto on other episodes, because that's very interesting in itself. So
We'll save that
Those-
one for the next.
yeah, those days are gone. Okay, you go to fur harvester sale. But obviously the Hudson Bay days are gone. So
Yeah. All right. We'll see you next time, and next week we're going to drop the Hoosier Trapper Outdoors. So we'll see you then.